The bustling streets of Washington, D.C. came alive that autumn morning as golden leaves danced in the crisp October breeze. The sky was a perfect shade of blue, the kind that makes you believe something special might happen. The familiar sound of police sirens echoed through the streets, but this time, they weren't rushing to an emergency. They were part of the former President Donald Trump's motorcade, making its way through the Capitol. People lined the sidewalks, some with their phones raised high, others just watching with curious eyes as the impressive line of black vehicles moved smoothly through the city. The Secret Service agents, wearing their signature dark suits and earpieces, maintained their serious expressions as they scanned the crowds. Their eyes never stopped moving, trained to spot even the smallest sign of trouble. Inside the heavily armored Cadillac one, known as the Beast, Trump sat quietly, looking through the bulletproof windows at the city passing by. He'd made this journey countless times before, but today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was just one of those days when the world seems to slow down just enough for you to notice the little things you usually miss. As the motorcade approached a busy intersection, something caught Trump's eye. Through the tinted windows, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with an old shopping cart. She wore layers of worn clothing, clearly trying to keep warm in the autumn chill. Her gray hair was neatly combed despite her circumstances, and there was a dignity about her that stood out even from a distance. The woman's shopping cart was stuck in a pothole, and she was trying her best to free it, but her aged hands weren't strong enough to lift the heavy cart filled with what looked like everything she owned in the world. People walked past her, some glancing her way, but everyone was too busy with their own lives to stop and help. Trump watched as the woman made another attempt to pull her cart free. Her hands were shaking from the effort, and she had to pause to catch her breath. In that moment, something changed in the atmosphere inside the presidential vehicle. The usual barrier between the powerful and the powerless seemed to dissolve. Without warning, Trump leaned forward and pressed the intercom button to speak to his head of security. "We need to stop," he said firmly. The response was immediate. Confused voices crackled through the radio system as Secret Service agents tried to understand if they'd heard correctly. In all their years of service, a request like this was unprecedented. "Sir, that's not standard protocol," came the professional response from his head of security. But Trump had already made up his mind. "Sometimes we need to forget about protocol," he replied, his voice carrying a determination that his staff knew all too well. The sudden slowing of the motorcade created a ripple effect. Traffic began backing up, and people on the sidewalks stopped in their tracks, wondering what was happening. Secret Service agents quickly moved into position, creating a protective perimeter as their training kicked in, even in this unusual situation. The crowd watched in disbelief as the heavy door of the presidential vehicle swung open. Some people gasped, others quickly pulled out their phones, knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. The autumn sun caught the presidential seal on the car door as Trump stepped out onto the street. The elderly woman, still focused on her stuck cart, hadn't even noticed the commotion around her. She jumped slightly when a shadow fell across her hands, and she looked up to find herself face to face with the former President of the United States. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as two human beings from completely different worlds, connected through a simple act of kindness. Nobody in the gathering crowd could hear what was being said, but they could see Trump bend down to examine the stuck wheel, his expensive suit getting dusty as he crouched near the pothole. The woman's expression changed from surprise to disbelief to something that looked like hope, an emotion that seemed to have been absent from her face for a very long time. The morning sun continued to shine down on this unexpected scene, as the world was about to witness how a simple moment of human connection could transcend all barriers of status, politics, and circumstance. This was just the beginning of a story that would soon capture hearts across the globe. The crowd around the presidential motorcade grew larger by the minute, with people whispering and pointing as they watched this unexpected scene unfold. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others just stood there, taking in every detail of this remarkable moment with their own eyes. "Let me help you with that," Trump said gently to the elderly woman, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised many onlookers. The woman's eyes widened as she fully realized who was standing before her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her cart, not from fear, but from a mix of emotion and exhaustion. "Oh my, I never thought," she started to say, her voice trailing off as tears began to well up in her eyes. Trump noticed her hands were red and chapped from the cold, and without hesitation, he removed his own expensive coat and draped it over her shoulders. The simple gesture seemed to break down any remaining barriers between them. As Trump examined the stuck cart, he learned that the woman's name was Rose, and she'd been living on the streets for the past 3 years. Her story spilled out naturally, not as a plea for help, but as a conversation between two human beings. She had once owned a small flower shop, she told him, but medical bills from her husband's long illness had taken everything they had. After his passing, she found herself alone and without a home. The Secret Service agents maintained their protective circle, but even their typically stoic expressions showed hints of emotion as they listened to Rose's story. One young agent discreetly wiped away a tear, trying to maintain his professional composure. Trump didn't just listen, he acted. With his own hands, he helped lift the cart from the pothole, something that made his security detail nervously shuffle their feet. But there was more to come. Pulling out his phone, he began making calls right there on the street. His voice carried authority, but also genuine concern as he spoke to various people who could help. "We're going to take care of you, Rose," he said firmly, putting his phone away. "No American should have to live like this, especially someone who's worked hard their whole life." His words weren't just empty promises. Within minutes, his staff began arranging immediate assistance. A woman from Trump's team quickly arrived with hot coffee and fresh pastries from a nearby cafe. Rose's hands shook as she held the warm cup, perhaps the first hot drink she'd had in days. The simple comfort of warm food and drink brought more tears to her eyes. But this time, they were tears of relief. The growing crowd watched in amazement as Trump continued to engage with Rose, showing no signs of rushing despite his busy schedule. He asked about her favorite flowers from when she owned her shop, and smiled warmly when she described the beautiful arrangements she used to create for weddings. What happened next showed the true impact of this chance encounter. Trump's team had already arranged for immediate temporary housing at a nearby hotel, but he wanted to ensure long-term help as well. He spoke with local social services on the spot, using his influence to cut through red tape that might have otherwise taken months to navigate. As all this was happening, the news began to spread. Social media lit up with photos and videos of the former president helping a homeless woman. But unlike many viral moments that fade quickly, this one felt different. It felt real, genuine, and important. The autumn breeze continued to blow gently through the streets of D.C., carrying with it the whispers of witnesses to this extraordinary scene. People from different walks of life, with different political views, found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder, watching as compassion bridged the divide between power and poverty. Rose could hardly believe what was happening. Just minutes ago, she had been struggling alone with a stuck cart, invisible to the world passing by. Now she was being treated with dignity and kindness by someone she only ever seen on television. Her story was about to change dramatically, but at that moment, she was simply grateful for the basic human connection she'd been missing for so long. The next few hours were like a whirlwind of activity, all centered around helping Rose start her new life. Trump's team moved with incredible efficiency, turning his impromptu promises into real action. A luxury hotel suite was quickly prepared, but that was just the beginning of what would become a life-changing day. As Rose was helped into a comfortable SUV that would take her to the hotel, Trump noticed something special about her shopping cart. Among her few possessions was a small, worn photo album. When he asked about it, Rose's eyes lit up with a spark of joy. She carefully opened it to show him pictures from her old flower shop, beautiful arrangements that had once brought happiness to countless weddings, birthdays, and special occasions. "These are absolutely beautiful," Trump said, genuinely impressed by the artistry in the photographs. "You have a real gift." His words seemed to awaken something in Rose that had been dormant for years, her sense of professional pride. She began explaining different flower combinations and techniques, momentarily forgetting about her current situation as she shared her passion. The crowd that had gathered was now completely silent, straining to hear this unexpected conversation about flowers between the former president and the homeless woman. Many were filming, but most had lowered their phones, too caught up in the human moment unfolding before them. Trump turned to one of his advisors and had a quick, quiet conversation. The advisor nodded and immediately started making phone calls. Meanwhile, the hotel staff had arrived to transport Rose's belongings. They handled her cart and possessions with respect, treating each item as if it were precious, because to Rose they were. "Before you go to the hotel," Trump said, "I want to show you something." He asked if Rose would be willing to take a short detour. Still wrapped in his coat, she nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her. The motorcade, with Rose now in one of the vehicles, made its way through the city streets. They stopped in front of a small, vacant storefront. The windows were dusty, and a for lease sign hung in the window. But Trump's team had already been busy. They'd made arrangements with the property owner, and as Rose stepped out of the SUV, Trump handed her a key. "This could be yours," he said softly. "A new flower shop. A fresh start." Rose's hands trembled as she took the key, tears flowing freely now. The storefront wasn't far from where she'd been found with her stuck cart, but it might as well have been a world away. The news cameras had caught up by now, but they kept a respectful distance. This wasn't just another photo opportunity, it was something real, something that touched the hearts of everyone watching. Social media was exploding with the story, but for once, the comments weren't filled with political arguments. Instead, people were sharing their own stories of hardship and hope. Trump's security team stayed alert but couldn't help being moved by the scene. One agent quietly mentioned to another that in all his years of service, he'd never seen anything quite like this. The spontaneous act of kindness had turned into something much bigger, a reminder of our shared humanity. As Rose stood looking at the potential site of her new shop, a small group of local business owners from nearby stores came out to introduce themselves. They'd heard what was happening and wanted to welcome their potential new neighbor. One woman, who owned a bakery down the street, immediately offered to stock Rose's future shop with fresh coffee and pastries. The autumn day was drawing to a close, but it felt like a new beginning. Trump's team had arranged for counselors, financial advisors, and social workers to meet with Rose the next day. They would help her navigate the path back to self-sufficiency, ensuring that this wasn't just a temporary fix, but a real, lasting change. As Rose finally headed to the hotel for her first night of proper rest in years, the city seemed different somehow. People walked a little slower, looked at each other a little longer, smiled a little more readily. The simple act of stopping to help someone in need had created ripples that would continue to spread. The next morning, Rose woke up in her hotel room, momentarily confused by the soft bed and warm surroundings. For a brief second, she wondered if yesterday had been just a dream. But then she saw Trump's coat carefully draped over a chair, and the reality of what had happened came flooding back. The room's phone rang softly. It was the hotel staff calling to remind her about breakfast. For the first time in years, she sat at a proper table, enjoying a warm meal. Other hotel guests smiled at her kindly, some recognizing her from the viral videos that had spread across the internet overnight. While Rose was having breakfast, Trump's team was already hard at work. The story had touched millions of hearts, and offers of help were pouring in from across the country. Local businesses were calling to donate supplies for the flower shop, and florists from around the city were reaching out to offer partnerships and support. A small group of volunteers had gathered outside the future shop location, armed with cleaning supplies and paint. They hadn't been asked to come. They just showed up, wanting to be part of this beautiful story. Some were business owners, others were just regular people who wanted to help. They began cleaning the windows and sweeping the sidewalk, preparing the space for its new beginning. Back at the hotel, Rose met with a kind-hearted social worker who helped her start the process of getting her identification documents in order. The social worker listened patiently as Rose shared more of her story. About her husband's illness, about the crushing medical bills, about the slow slide from middle-class life to homelessness. There were no judgments, only understanding and practical help. Around noon, there was a knock at her hotel room door. A local clothing store owner had brought a selection of warm, professional clothes for Rose to choose from. "You'll need these for when you're running your shop," the woman said with a warm smile. Rose ran her fingers over the soft fabric of a blue cardigan, remembering the last time she'd worn new clothes. The day continued to bring surprises. A well-known local chef arrived with lunch, not just for Rose, but for all the volunteers working at the shop. He set up an impromptu buffet on the sidewalk, and soon the whole block felt like a community celebration. People who normally rushed past each other stopped to talk and share stories. In the afternoon, Trump called personally to check on Rose's progress. He wasn't calling for publicity. In fact, his team hadn't even announced the call. He simply wanted to make sure everything was going smoothly. Rose told him about all the kindness she'd experienced since yesterday, her voice full of emotion. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to stop and care," Trump said, "and then others remember how to care too." The words weren't meant for cameras or headlines. They were just part of a quiet conversation between two people whose paths had crossed in an extraordinary way. As the day went on, more news stations picked up the story, but they weren't just reporting about Trump's act of kindness. They were covering the wave of community support that had followed. Interviews with the volunteers, the local business owners, and even the hotel staff painted a picture of a city coming together to help one of their own. The future flower shop was already transforming. The volunteers had cleaned the windows until they sparkled, and someone had brought flower boxes to hang outside. A local artist had offered to paint a beautiful sign for the store, and a retired carpenter was measuring the space for display shelves he wanted to build. By evening, Rose stood in front of the shop window, looking at her reflection. She barely recognized herself in her new clothes, standing straight and tall. Behind her reflection, she could see the cleaned interior of what would soon be her new beginning. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but these weren't tears of sadness or desperation like she'd grown used to. They were tears of hope and gratitude. The simple act of stopping a motorcade had sparked something powerful. It wasn't just about one person helping another anymore. It had become a reminder of how much good people are capable of when they open their hearts to others. As the sun rose on the third day of Rose's new life, the transformation was already remarkable. The news of Trump's spontaneous act of kindness had sparked a movement that was growing bigger by the hour. But what made this story special wasn't just the grand gestures. It was the small, heartfelt moments that kept happening. That morning, a group of senior citizens arrived at the shop, carrying boxes of old photos of their wedding flowers. They'd heard Rose's story and wanted to share their own memories. One elderly gentleman brought a pressed flower from his wedding day 50 years ago. "Maybe you could display these in your shop," he suggested, his eyes twinkling, "to show people how flowers become part of their life stories." The local coffee shop owner had started bringing Rose a fresh cup of coffee every morning, just the way she liked it. It wasn't part of any official support program. It was simply one neighbor looking after another. He'd set up a small table and chair outside her future shop where she could sit and watch the renovation progress while enjoying her morning coffee. Trump's team had been busy behind the scenes, but not in the way most people expected. Instead of making this a political story, they focused on connecting Rose with people who could help her succeed. A successful florist from another state offered to mentor her, sharing business tips and supplier connections. They spoke for hours on the phone, talking not just about flowers, but about second chances and fresh starts. Around midday, something unexpected happened. A young couple walked up to Rose as she sat at her coffee table. The woman was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. "We're getting married next month," she explained, "and we'd like to be your first official customers. Would you help us plan our wedding flowers?" Rose's hands trembled as she took out her old photo album, now her makeshift portfolio. As she showed them her past work, a small crowd gathered to watch. The young couple didn't just make a deposit for their flowers. They gave Rose something even more valuable: trust in her abilities and hope for her future. The renovation work continued throughout the day. A local handyman fixed the old air conditioning unit free of charge. A group of art students from a nearby college worked on painting beautiful murals of flowers on the shop's interior walls. Each person added their own touch to the project, making it more special. In the afternoon, something beautiful happened. A delivery truck pulled up, and to everyone's surprise, it was filled with flowers: roses, lilies, daisies, and more. The driver explained that flower shops from across the city had each donated a portion of their stock so Rose could start building her inventory. The sidewalk soon bloomed with colors and fragrance. As Rose arranged some of the flowers in temporary displays, passers-by stopped to admire them. Many didn't know her story yet, but they were drawn in by the beauty of the flowers and her obvious skill in arranging them. One little girl asked her mother if they could buy a flower for her teacher. It was Rose's first sale, even before the shop officially opened. Trump called again that evening, but this time he had news. His team had worked with local authorities to set up a program inspired by Rose's story. It would help other homeless elderly people reconnect with their professional skills and rebuild their lives. Rose's flower shop would become more than just a business. It would be a symbol of hope and new beginnings. As the day drew to a close, Rose sat in her hotel room, looking out at the city lights. On her table was a small vase with a single rose, a gift from the young couple who'd be her first customers. Next to it lay a business card, freshly printed with her name and the shop's address. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that dreams can bloom again, even after the darkest times. The city was changing, not just for Rose, but for everyone who'd been touched by this story. People walked a little slower, smiled a little more, and looked at each other with kinder eyes. Sometimes it takes just one moment of kindness to remind us all of our shared humanity. The fourth day brought sunshine and an unexpected surprise. The local news had picked up a touching detail from Rose's past that no one had noticed before. In her old photo album, there was a faded newspaper clipping from 20 years ago, showing her flower shop providing arrangements for a charity event at Trump's hotels. The universe had a strange way of bringing things full circle. That morning, a group of homeless individuals came to visit Rose. They weren't asking for anything. They just wanted to share their joy for their friend who had lived on the streets with them. Rose hugged each one, tears in her eyes as she remembered the small kindnesses they had shown each other during difficult times. Without saying a word, she began making small bouquets for each of them. "Everyone deserves to have flowers in their life," she said softly as she handed them out. The moment was captured by a passing photographer, and the image would later become a symbol of how one act of kindness could multiply in unexpected ways. Trump's team had been working quietly to help Rose's friends too. They coordinated with local shelters and support services to ensure that others who had helped Rose during her time on the streets would also receive assistance. It wasn't about publicity. It was about doing what was right. Around lunchtime, something magical happened at the shop. A group of school children arrived with their teacher. They had been learning about kindness and community service, and each child brought a painted pot with soil. The teacher explained they wanted to help Rose start a small container garden outside the shop. Rose taught the children how to plant seeds, explaining how with care and patience, something beautiful would grow. One little boy asked her if that's what happened to her, if someone's kindness helped her grow again. The wisdom of his innocent question touched everyone's hearts. The afternoon brought more progress on the shop. Local contractors had finished installing new lighting that made the flowers glow like jewels. A tech-savvy teenager set up a simple website for the shop, featuring the story of its rebirth. Within hours, orders started coming in from people across the country who wanted to support Rose's fresh start. As word spread, other businesses began to take notice. A national gardening supply company offered to provide Rose with a year's worth of supplies. But what touched her most was when the owner explained why. His own mother had once struggled with homelessness, and someone's kindness had helped her too. Trump called again, this time with more good news. His foundation would be starting a program to help small business owners who were at risk of becoming homeless due to medical bills or other hardships. Rose's story had opened eyes to a problem many hadn't realized existed. How quickly someone could go from being a successful business owner to living on the streets. In the evening, Rose sat with her new friends, the coffee shop owner, the young couple planning their wedding, the senior citizens who'd shared their memories, and even some of her friends from the streets. They all gathered for a simple dinner in what would soon be her shop. Someone had brought folding chairs and tables, another person brought home-cooked food, and the coffee shop owner provided hot drinks. As they sat together, sharing stories and hopes for the future, Rose realized something important. Her flower shop wouldn't just be a business. It would be a place where kindness could bloom, where people could come together, where hope could take root and grow. The day ended with a beautiful gesture. The local community had arranged for a small orchestra to play outside the shop. As the gentle music filled the evening air, people from all walks of life stopped to listen. Rich and poor, young and old, all standing together, reminded that what connects us is stronger than what divides us. That night, as Rose looked out her hotel window at the city lights, she held one of the painted pots the children had brought. Inside, tiny seeds were already beginning their journey toward the light, just like her own journey of renewal. The fifth day dawned with a special energy in the air. Today was the day Rose would finally open her flower shop for business. The early morning light caught the dewdrops on the flowers in the window display, making them sparkle like tiny diamonds. Rose had been up since before sunrise, too excited to sleep. The transformation of the shop was complete, and it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The walls were painted in soft, warm colors, with the students' flower murals adding splashes of vibrant life. The old wooden floors had been restored to a warm honey color, and the new lighting made everything glow with a gentle warmth. Trump had sent a simple but elegant sign for the shop front. It read Rose's Flower Garden, where second chances bloom. The sign captured perfectly what the shop had come to represent, not just for Rose, but for the entire community. Below it, the flower boxes were overflowing with fresh blooms, making the sidewalk feel like a garden path. The morning brought an unexpected visitor, an elderly gentleman who had seen Rose's story on the news. He shared that he had owned a small business himself years ago and lost everything during a difficult time. Now back on his feet, he wanted to be Rose's first official customer of the day. He bought a bouquet of yellow roses, a symbol of new friendships. As the morning progressed, more people began arriving. They weren't just coming to buy flowers, they were coming to be part of something special. A young mother brought her daughter, explaining to the little girl how sometimes people just need a chance to start over. The child solemnly presented Rose with a drawing of flowers she had made. Around noon, something extraordinary happened. The local business association held a small ceremony to officially welcome Rose to the neighborhood. The street was filled with people, including many who had helped with the shop's renovation. Even some of the Secret Service agents who had been present during Trump's initial stop came by, this time in plain clothes, to show their support. One touching moment came when a group of hospital nurses arrived. They explained that they wanted to set up a weekly flower delivery service for their patients. Flowers bring hope, one nurse said, and that's the best medicine sometimes. Rose found herself planning special arrangements that would bring color and joy to hospital rooms. In the afternoon, the young couple who had ordered their wedding flowers returned with more news. They had decided to hold their ceremony right there in front of the shop, where their love story had become intertwined with Rose's story of renewal. The idea quickly grew, with other local businesses offering to help make it a community celebration. Trump called again, but this time he listened more than he spoke. He wanted to hear about how the community had come together, about the small acts of kindness that had multiplied day after day. Rose shared stories about the children's painted pots, the senior citizens' wedding photos, and the homeless friends who still stopped by to chat. As evening approached, something magical happened. People began bringing lights, strings of tiny bulbs, small lanterns, and gentle spotlights. They decorated the trees along the street, creating a warm glow that made the whole block feel like an enchanted garden. Someone started playing soft music, and soon the sidewalk became an impromptu community gathering. Rose stood in her shop doorway, watching as people mingled, chatted, and shared stories. A week ago, she had been invisible to these same people, struggling alone on these same streets. Now she was part of a community, surrounded by friends who had become like family. The day ended with a simple gesture that brought tears to Rose's eyes. The coffee shop owner arrived with a special delivery, a small key rack for the wall, with a single hook that held the key Trump had given her. Below it was a small plaque that read, "Every key opens a new beginning." Looking at that key, Rose realized that the real gift hadn't just been the shop. It had been the reminder that every person has value, that every life can bloom again, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the world. 1 week had passed since Trump's motorcade had stopped for Rose. The story had touched millions of hearts across the world, but its real impact could be seen in the small, everyday moments that continued to unfold in and around the flower shop. That morning, Rose arrived early as usual, but today felt different. She reached for her shop key and remembered how just days ago, her hands had been cold and trembling, trying to free a stuck shopping cart. Now those same hands were strong and steady, expertly arranging flowers and bringing beauty into people's lives. The shop had become more than just a business. It was a place where hope grew alongside the flowers. A grandmother brought her grandchild in to buy a single flower, using the moment to teach about kindness and second chances. A businessman who always rushed past now stopped daily, buying small bouquets for the reception desk at his office, saying how the flowers reminded his employees to slow down and appreciate life's beauty. Around mid-morning, something wonderful happened. A small group of business owners arrived with an unusual request. Inspired by Rose's story, they had started a program to help other homeless individuals reconnect with their former professions. They wanted to know if Rose would share her experience and maybe mentor others who were trying to restart their lives. Trump's influence had started something remarkable, but it was the community that kept it growing. The local council announced plans to convert an unused building into a center where homeless people could receive job training, medical care, and support to rebuild their lives. They asked Rose to be on the advisory board, knowing her experience would be invaluable. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from some of Rose's old street friends, but this time they came with news. Thanks to the attention Rose's story had brought to the homeless crisis, many of them had found help too. One had reconnected with his family, another had found housing, and a third was starting job training. They celebrated together in the shop, surrounded by the sweet scent of fresh flowers. A touching moment came when a local photographer shared a series of pictures he'd been taking throughout the week. The photos showed the transformation not just of the shop, but of Rose herself. From the first moment when Trump had stopped to help, through the renovation, to today, each image captured a step in her journey from survival to revival. As the day went on, Rose received an unexpected call. A national magazine wanted to feature her shop in a story, not about Trump or politics, but about community and second chances. The reporter explained that people needed to hear stories of hope, stories that showed how one person's kindness could spark a chain reaction of positive change. In the early evening, the young couple who had booked their wedding stopped by with their families. They all sat together in the shop, planning the ceremony that would take place right there on the sidewalk where hope had bloomed. Rose found herself sharing stories of her own wedding day, remembering the joy of new beginnings. The day's most powerful moment came when a shy teenage girl visited the shop. She explained that she had been struggling with depression, feeling invisible and hopeless. But after hearing Rose's story, she had found courage. "If you could start over," she said softly, "maybe I can too." Rose hugged her tight, knowing that sometimes hope comes in the form of a simple story that says you matter. As night fell, Rose stood in her shop doorway, looking at the street that had changed so much in just 1 week. The same pavement where she had once felt invisible now held her footprints of purpose. The windows that had once been just glass she passed by now reflected her dreams come true. She touched the key in her pocket, the key that Trump had given her. It had opened more than just a door to a shop. It had opened doors in people's hearts, reminding everyone that sometimes the greatest gifts we can give each other are hope, kindness, and the chance to begin again. 1 month had passed since that life-changing moment when Trump's motorcade stopped on a busy street. The story that began with a stuck shopping cart had blossomed into something beautiful that continued to touch lives in unexpected ways. That morning, Rose stood in her shop, preparing for a special day. The young couple who had become her first customers were getting married. The sidewalk outside had been transformed into a magical garden, with flowers cascading from every possible space. String lights twinkled overhead, and chairs lined the street for guests and community members who had become part of this amazing journey. The bride had asked Rose to create her bouquet, but this wasn't just any wedding arrangement. Rose had carefully woven into it flowers from all the local shops that had donated to help her start over. Each bloom represented the kindness that had given her a second chance, and now these flowers would be part of another new beginning. Trump had sent a handwritten note for the occasion. It wasn't political or showy, just a simple message about how one moment of kindness could grow into something wonderful. The note would be framed and hung in the shop, next to the key that had opened the door to so many new possibilities. Throughout the morning, people gathered for the ceremony. There were business owners who had helped renovate the shop, children who had planted flowers in painted pots, and even some of Rose's friends from her days on the streets. Now, with new hope in their eyes and new paths ahead of them. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. As the couple exchanged vows in front of Rose's shop, everyone could feel the power of new beginnings. The bride held her bouquet of second chances, and tears of joy fell freely among the gathered crowd. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a celebration of how hope can bloom in the most unexpected places. After the ceremony, something remarkable happened. The bride didn't throw her bouquet. Instead, she carefully divided it into small bundles. These were given to homeless individuals who had been invited to share in the celebration. Each person received not just flowers, but a card with information about the new community center that had been inspired by Rose's story. As the day went on, more people shared their own stories of change. The local business association announced that 20 more homeless individuals had found employment through their new program. The hospital reported that their patients' rooms were brighter and more hopeful because of Rose's weekly flower deliveries. Even the grumpy parking attendant admitted that seeing fresh flowers every morning had softened his heart. In the late afternoon, a news crew arrived to film a follow-up story. But instead of focusing on Trump or politics, they captured something more meaningful. The way a community had come together to show that everyone deserves a chance to bloom again. Rose spoke from her heart about how a single act of kindness had created a garden of hope. As evening approached, the wedding celebration transformed into a community gathering. People danced on the same street where Rose had once struggled with her cart. Children played among the flower displays, and older folks shared stories of their own moments of kindness received and given. The final touching moment came when Rose unveiled a small plaque near her shop door. It read, "On this spot, humanity bloomed. Never stop believing in second chances." Below it hung photographs, the stuck cart, Trump stopping to help, the renovation, the wedding, and countless small moments of kindness in between. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above the street, Rose looked around at what one moment of kindness had created. Her shop wasn't just selling flowers, it was growing hope, nurturing dreams, and reminding everyone that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the most unexpected places. The story of Trump stopping his motorcade had made headlines, but the real story was what happened after. How one person's kindness could inspire a whole community to remember their shared humanity. And in Rose's flower shop, hope continued to bloom, one petal at a time.